And there it is. So whenever you want, please.
Okay. Okay, fine. I'll share my screen and I will start. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for, yeah. Oh, it's a little bit slow, the machine. What's going on? Okay, I think now it's working. Okay, this is more a chat than a presentation. I would like to talk with you about these ideas on, what other languages, what other features have other languages in their IDEs and in the language itself. Um, so it is not really a presentation, as I said. More, I would like to have more like a conversation. So anyway, I'll start. And the idea is stealing the idea of the talk or of the chat is stealing idea from other IDEs. Because we know that Smalltalk is great. Gila told us that in Tucumán, like 3 years ago with his great presentation. But he also told us that it's not the only or the better one, and there are other things that we have to look at. And I think that regarding the IDE or the tools that we have in Smalltalk, in some of them we are falling behind other languages. And this is something that you can experience when you use other IDEs, and you start seeing that Smalltalk is, it's great because it has inspectors, the debugger is great, the browser is great, but sometimes they're kind of old, and we need to improve them a little bit. We all know that many of the ideas about software development tools came from Smalltalk. We all know that. But also we know that many of them did not. For example, syntax highlighting or autocomplete were not developed in the Smalltalk environment, and we took them from other IDEs. And I think we need to change a little bit the user interface to make it more programmer friendly and have a better programmer experience. And of course, there are many things that we can improve in Smalltalk regarding those things. And I'm going to concentrate in a few of them, and the ones that are more related to the language and not to how to communicate Smalltalk with other systems. And why I want to talk about this? Basically because every semester I face 50 new users, 50 new Smalltalk users, at the university. That's great. But also it's a challenge because sometimes when I ask them, what do you think about Smalltalk? Do you like it? Or what was your first impression when you met Smalltalk? They usually say things like this. I did not like it at the beginning. Oh, sorry, I cannot see here. I did not like it at the beginning. It looked like a toy. That's very common. The UI looks like from the 80s. Well, I think that's right. That's correct. It's almost from the 70s, not the 80s. I can do the same much faster in Intellij, and so on. Of course, these are those things. They say those things at the beginning when we start the semester. When they get used to Smalltalk, when they get used to the UI and to the language, they after that they really love it, and they say, "Oh, okay, this is interesting." Most of them understand, the benefits of having a meta-circular environment, dynamic language, and so on. But the first impression is not really good. So one of the things I noticed I've been using Intellij lately, because of a webinar I'm doing, and I'm going to to use IntelliJ as an example of things that we can borrow from. And one of them is, for example, that everything that you can do in IntelliJ is context aware. So it's based on where the cursor is located in the AST of a method, plus the type information they have, and of course, all kind of information that they can get from the system. So when I mean we need context-aware actions, I mean that you can do things based on where you are located in the code. We have some things like that. For example, in quiz, you can rename a class from the class definition. So if I press Command Shift R here, I will rename the class. Okay. when my machine is presenting with zoom, it gets really slow. I don't know why. So if you see that it takes some time, it's because of the machine. But not only we can rename the class here, we can also rename the superclass. Of course, I'm not going to rename object. Or we can also rename the category. Yes. So it's contextual. I can also come here and rename the instance variable. You may say, okay, it's nothing new. Yeah, it's true also. We have Faro. Faro has the same things. I can rename the class. I can rename, well, of course, the superclass. In this case, I'm not going to do it. I cannot rename the package that it's not supported. And I can rename the instance variables. But if we go, for example, to Visual Age, that's not supported. If I want to rename the class from here, it's not possible. I have to go to how usually was done with Smalltalk and go to the, well, in this case, I cannot do anything from the class definition. I have to come here and rename it from here. So Smalltalk got better with context-aware actions. For example, another thing that we can do in quiz, I don't know, let's see, we have something like this. I can rename a message from the method definition. Yes, I can say, okay, rename it with this. And if I have a temporary variable, I don't know, something like that, I can rename it from the definition and also from where it's being used. So it's really context aware, the rename. Also, if there is an instance variable like we had, I don't know, something like this, I can rename it from here. Yes, the same thing happens in Faro with the difference. Faro has a problem with instance variables. If I want to rename the instance variable here, it will rename it, but for some reason it doesn't change. It did? Okay, yeah, it did. Well, it didn't work yesterday when I tried. Anyway, so that's very cool, and it helps you a lot with the, when you want to at least rename something. Another important thing that we have in all Smalltalks now is the syntax highlighting, and but sometimes I think we don't get all the power we can get from it. For example, here in quiz, we changed a little bit the syntax highlighted. It's not complete, the change, but for example, it's telling me that self is not going to answer M2. Self doesn't know how to answer M2 because it's not implemented in example one class. And he can deduce that because the receiver is self. The same thing is I put super, yeah, or the same thing if I write I don't know, a literal like 1. mm, But if I put 1 plus 2, it works. It's in blue, it's not in red. But if I say self plus something, immediately shows me that it doesn't answer plus. This doesn't happen in Faro. If I say, I don't know, self plus 1, everything looks fine. The syntax highlighting is not showing me that could fail. And visualize is really interesting how it solves it, because it has some kind of type inference. So if I say self plus 1, it will tell me that the message is not implemented in self. And the same thing with literals and so on. Um, so things are not, are getting better with the syntax highlighting. Other interesting thing I wanted to show that I think it's important to have, at least for beginners, is to show the variables, uh, the variable, what the variable is referencing very easily. So in, as part of the hover help. For example, here is showing me that the type of temp1 is a small integer. That's because of live typing. And also it's telling me that at this moment is 10. So of course you can come here. We all know Smalltalk and how the debugger works. But for a new developer, having that information here when you point at variable is very, very helpful. For new programmer, it's very helpful. Those are the kind of things that I think helps programmers to understand better what they're doing. But we have other things that are not really, really user-friendly. Like, for example, if I have another variable, temp2, if I want to use it, let's say I want to say temp2 something, is not, no, sorry. Let's do this. I don't know, print on, and I want to put here temp2, it's not going to appear because it's not defined. And to define temp2, we have to change the context. I have to go to the variable's definition, put it there, and then go back to the place I was using that variable. And that's absurd. I mean, it takes you time. It makes you forget what you were doing, and it's not really user friendly. A better solution would be to press some key here and to make it immediately define the variable. That's something that Visualize does. That's very interesting. For example, if I have temp1, I don't know, equals assign 10. If I come here, declare temporary variable, it declares it automatically. It gives me only the option to put it as a temporary variable, not as an instance variable. But anyway, at least it's something. Of course, that in Quiz and in Faro, if I save the method, it will tell me, do you want to declare it as a block temp, method temps, or instance variable? But I have to save the method to do this. And the problem with that is that if I have something like this and try to save, I will get an error and nothing would happen because, this message is not complete, this message then. So those kind of things are very useful, and I think it helps a lot with the programming that we usually do. Okay, so we have some. Um, well, first I wanted to show this and the different solutions that each Smalltalk has, and some small ideas where we could improve our tools. Now I will switch to IntelliJ, and I will start showing the same things and other in IntelliJ. Of course, this is Java, a very interesting language. Uh, for example, here we have a method that uses v1, but it's not defined. So as in Visual Age, it's very simple. You just press Command Enter or Alt Enter, whatever the operating system you're working on, and it allows you to create as a local variable, as an instance variable, as a parameter, and so on. So this is really useful. It's very common because we usually create or we usually reference a variable before defining it, because when we are developing, we are thinking about, I want this object, and we are not thinking about, I want to define the variable to reference this object. Of course, in the case of Java, you have to define the type of the variable. um, Another example that I think is really interesting that we could borrow and use in Smalltalk is that when you rename a parameter, that parameter, I mean, currently, for example, in Quiz and in Faro, in all the Smalltalks Visual Age, if I rename, let's say I have a subclass of this one, that also defines M11. Okay, nice name. I think I call it P1. If I rename the parameter, it will only rename it here in this method. Yeah, okay. Oh, but it doesn't rename it in the subclass, and it doesn't rename it in the superclass if there is one, and it doesn't rename it in other implementers of this message. Of course, you may not want to rename it in other places, but it would be nice for the environment to ask me, hey, do you want to rename it in the subclasses? Do you want to rename it in these other implementers? And so on. That will help you to, have the change impact in all the places that message is implemented. Well, that's an option that IntelliJ has. For example, if I rename P1 here, let's put it P2. Oh no, P2 is already taken. Sorry. Okay, let's call it P3. Those names are really, as you can see, declarative, and they show exactly the meaning of the objects they are referencing. Anyway, if I rename it to P3, it will ask me if I want to rename the parameter P1 in the subclass that I didn't show I have. There is a subclass here with the same method definition with P1 and P2. So again, let's go back. If I rename it to P3, it will ask me if I want to rename it in the subclasses, and I can say yes or no. In this case, I will say yes. And of course, it renames it in the subclass in this case. It's a small thing, but it allows you to maintain the name of the parameters the same in all places. What else? Another interesting thing, or something I have problem with the autocomplete in Smalltalk, is that and it's not only me, and I'm talking about the new Smalltalkers, students that are learning Smalltalk, that when you send a message, for example, at put, okay, if you don't know the message, we all know what at put does. We all know what is expecting as parameters, but a new programmer doesn't know. And he sees at put, and okay, what's the parameter in the at keyword? What's the parameter in the put keyword? He doesn't know it. Yes, and for him to know him, or for her to know it, to know it, to know it is has to go look the implementers, change the context, and see. Okay, I don't know. I'm using a bag, so the index and the object. It has to do all those things. Sorry, my wife turned off the AC. I don't know why. Okay. Um, so what do we have in quiz to help with this? When I look at the auto completion, I can go, and see the implementation of the message. It is using live typing. It knows that self is not implemented at put, but it's implemented in object. That's why it's showing me the implementation of at put in objects, and I can see at least, what are the names of the parameters. It's it's a little bit better. It's not the best, but at least you can see uh, you know um, the name of the parameters without going to the implementers, and it's only showing the name of the parameters for the implementers of that message, depending on the type of the receiver. I think it would be nice or nicer when you select the output for the autocomplete to put here index and value, and allow me to change it very easily. So it gives to the programmer the name of the parameters that are showing the role that those objects are going to have in the message, and it helps you to understand a little bit more what the message is doing. Well, that's what IntelliJ and Eclipse and all the IDEs for Java they do. For example, here, if I select that I want, no, wait a minute. If I say M1, it shows me the names of the parameters and, of course, the types in this case. And if I want to ask the auto completion for which parameters, which names I can use here, it's very, it shows me first the ones that match the type. Yes. So I will put an int. And now if I ask for which other thing I can put here, you can see that now as a string is first. Yes. So this could be seen as basic stuff, but when you get used to these little suggestions, these little things, and if you go to another IDE that doesn't have these things, you feel like something is missing. Okay, so that is what happens to me with some students that are used to work with statically typed languages with this kind of IDEs. When they go to Smalltalk, they say, it's not telling me, the name of the parameters. It's not helping me. The autocompletion is not helping me with which parameters I can use. We could have a better autocompletion, and that could match the type of the same thing that Intellij is doing here, the type of the parameter with the type of the variables, in this case based on live typing, for example, or in the case of Visual Age using the type inference that they implemented. So that's a nice tool. What else? Well, another interesting thing that is very, very useful. Sometimes you have a message sent, but you didn't declare, you want to, get the result in a variable, put the result in a variable. So in the case of a small talk, you should do something like, I don't know, let's put here at 1, put 2. If I want to store the result of this message sent in a variable, I have to say, okay, v1. Okay, so now I have to define v1. And, I have to do a lot of things. In the case of Intellij, I press Alt, Enter, introduce local variable, and it does it for me. It's very simple. That's very useful. It's very common because, again, usually you are thinking about the message that you want to send, and you're not thinking about keeping the result. And then when you realize, oh yeah, you know what? I want to use the result. That's when you create the variable. So these little things helps you a lot to go faster and to implement faster. What else? Another interesting idea that I'm not sure about this one. I'm not sure about the example. I'm not sure if the solution that Intellij has is better than the one we have in Smalltalk. And the one I'm talking about is the related with through when you are debugging. When you want to go to inside a block. That's a very common problem when you have something like this. I don't know. Okay. First of all, new students, new small talkers, when they don't see very easily why when they do into, they get inside the select. Usually, it's like they are thinking like the for instruction in Java or in Pascal or in C or whatever. And, that's an instruction in the language, so they cannot debug it. So when they press select into when they have the select and they get inside the implementation of the message select, for them it's like, oh, whoa, what's going on? They were not expecting that. So we have to explain, and of course, if they do over, what happened? They have no idea what happened. And remember, I'm talking about new programmers, new small talkers. They only know in other languages into and over, because there is no other thing. There is no thing like restart. We have to explain what a restart is. They only know proceed into and over. And when we have to explain them the through, it's very difficult for them to understand it. And okay, once they understand it, they start using it. But it's very common for them that, okay, I'm now inside the block. So now I'm going to do, an over. And they get again into the select. They don't realize that when they do a through, okay, you do an over here, but now if you want to keep debugging into the block, you have to do through again. You don't want to get back to the select, to the implementation of the select. Excuse me? Oh, I thought somebody asked something. So the through, it's a very interesting tool. So somebody's talking. Somebody left the Pocho, please put some. Well, so the through is very useful, but for new programmers, for new small talkers, sorry, it's difficult to grasp at the beginning. So, that Java has what they call Oh, help me with this, Gilad. They are not closures. They are they are not anonymous function. They call them lambda functions. Sorry, I don't know why I couldn't remember the name. The lambda functions. Let's say they're closures, so to use the same name. And here I have an example. Let's debug this. It takes a little bit to start. Wait a minute. Okay. Okay, here we are. So let's go into M4. Well, this is the first interesting thing. I have in this line two message sends. The new message send, that is not really a message send, but they think about that, and the M4. So it tells me, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to go inside the constructor of example? Do you want to go to M4? Okay, let's go to M4. That's what I want to do. And here I have a message send with a closure. So that's sending a closure as a parameter. So if I do an into, what do I want to debug here? M5, or do I want to debug the closure? So it's the same problem as I show in Smalltalk with quiz. So if I do an into, again, it asks me, do you want to debug M5 or do you want to debug the closure? And if I select the closure, it allows me to debug the closure. Okay, and now I got inside the length and so on. So it's, I'm not sure if this solution is better than the one that we have with Smalltalk, with the through, but it is something to explore. Let's do an over here. The same thing here. If I do an into, it will tell me, okay, where do you want to go into? The implementation of a stream, the implementation of map, to this closure, and you have the option to select where do you want to go and debug. If I want to go here, it takes me to there. So I don't know. It is something to.
A question.
Yes. Yes.
So it's an option, or you are forced to choose an option?
Yes. I mean, if you do I think. Well, let me try something, because you have.
And a related question: can you do this with the keyboard, or you must use the mouse?
Good question. I don't know. I think you can do it with the keyboard, but I'm not completely sure. I know that you can do step into with F7 and force step into with Command Shift F7. But the selection, I think you have to do it with the mouse. I don't know. But again, let me do something. Now with Java, you can do a drop frame. It doesn't drop the frame of the method that you are debugging. It takes you to the previous one. I don't know why. But what I wanted to show you is the force step into, it doesn't ask you. It goes directly to the implementation. It's like the into that we know, okay? And the into is the one that asks you, what do you want to do? Yeah. Again, I'm not sure if this is a good solution, but it is a different one. And when I saw it first time, I said, well, maybe we can try it and see how programmers react to this. Okay, another example. I'm sorry if I'm boring you. I hope I'm not. Another interesting example. a class rename. If I rename a class, let's say the same class I'm using here, let's say I put, I don't know, example 1, what Intellij does is not only to rename the class, but also allows me to rename, or it asks me to rename variables that had that name as part of the variable. So here, in this method, I have a parameter called example and a variable called an example. So it says, hey, you're changing the name from example to something. Do you want to rename this variable? Do you want to rename this parameter or not? Of course, here I'm using example and example 1. It's not an interesting example, by the way, but you know, when you change a name completely from something that meant I don't know, from person to customer, you know, it's a big change, and you want all your variables that you may have called a person or person to be renamed as a customer or customer. It's a nice tool. It allows you to keep, again, the name. It's like renaming the parameters. You know, it allows you to keep the names in a consistent way. Okay. Another example, struct method. We all love, I think, struct method. It's a very powerful refactoring.
A question.
Yes.
Because maybe you are going to another topic.
Yeah.
So if you rename an instance variable, the getters and setters, you get an offer to rename them, or
Yes.
what happens?
Yeah, I'm going to show a similar example in a few minutes. So struct method. As I said, we all love struct method. It's very powerful. Refactoring is very helpful to make more declarative your code. So an interesting feature that this is not new. I think the refactoring browser had it at the beginning, but I don't know why. Not Visual Edge, not Faro, not Squeak, and well, not Quiz. When you have the same code that you want to struct in different methods, it doesn't realize that it is the same code. That's how currently the struct method works in most of the small talks. Well, in IntelliJ, if I want to struct this code, M1 blah, 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 plus 5, that I also have the same code in another method, in this one, it will ask me if I want to replace it. I don't know, let's call it XXX, whatever. I'm going to explain this in the next example. It asks me if I want to replace also the other occurrences of the same code that it is in other places in the same class. It only looks in the same class. It doesn't look in subclasses or superclasses, but it's at least in the same class. So that's also very cool. And again, this is not new. I remember reading papers about doing this stuff, but sadly, no Smalltalk currently have this. And another interesting feature of IntelliJ with the struct method is that he not only realized that you have the same code, exactly the same code, but also realizes that you may have the same patterns of collaborations that you can extract and that you can parameterize some of the parts of that code that you are extracting. Let me show an example. I have again here M1 that has 10 and hello as parameters, and 5 and plus 5. And then here I have M1 with 20, by, and 10. It's not exactly the same code. but it is the same pattern of collaborations. So if I do an extract method here, let's say I want to call it xxx again, I do a refactor, Intellij realizes that there is other part in the system that uses the same pattern of collaborations, and that could be parameterized. And it tells me, do you want to extract the parameters to replace duplicates? So if I say no, like I did in the previous example, it would only extract what I selected. If I say yes, it will also replace the other parts of the code that can parameterize with this. Let's do all with this new abstraction. So now I have xxx that gets 3 parameters, okay, and all the places where I was sending the message, I think it was M1 with all those things, is completely parameterized. So that's a very cool feature. That's very interesting because sometimes you don't realize that you have the same code, but only some parts of it changes. And Intellij is smart enough to realize that and help you extracting a better method, creating a better abstraction. Okay. What else? This is more Java related, but we can use it in a small talk in the initialize message when we have an initialize message that receives many parameters. What we usually do in the initialize is to, store the parameters in an instance variable. So it's very helpful to be able here to say, okay, create an instance variable for this parameter, and it does it for you. Very simple. In quiz, what we have is, let's say I want to, I don't know, with 10 and something. Let's say I want to do this. Well, of course, example class 1 doesn't know how to answer with and, so I will create it. And it allows me to select instance creation as a category. And if I select instance creation, it automatically creates, the template of what we usually do in an instance creation message. That is, send the self new initialize with blah, blah, blah. So I can rename here, a number or whatever. This is a name. I will remove this, save it, proceed, and now I will create the initialize, and it realized that it is an initialize message, so it will categorize it as initialization, and it will automatically assign each of the parameters to the corresponding instance variable. And this is a very important thing. Look at the name of the parameters. It is using the same name of the parameters of the initialize as the one in the instance creation message. It's not putting here a small integer, a string. It is keeping the same name as the instance creation message. Yeah. I don't know. This is, you could say that it's not that important, but again, those are small things that can help you or not, depending on how you program. As I showed in IntelliJ, doing this, I want to assign this parameter to an instance variable. It is very simple. And the interesting thing is that if I rename this variable, the instance variable, it will rename also the parameter because they are linked. I don't know. Again, a small thing, but it is interesting. Okay, another one. Replace blah, blah, blah with lambda body. This is something I learned from Facu, Facundo Pelati. I think he's here. Well, he helped us in the small talks at Tucumán, when we went to Tucumán, when Gilad came. And as we all know, if we have this closure, if we have this collaboration, we can replace all this code with 20 plus 10. So what I did here is the same, but in Java. I wrote a closure lambda function that receives a parameters and adds 10 to that parameter, and the apply as long is the value with 20. So sometimes you look at this and you don't realize that there is no need to send the message value, that you could directly use the and replace the x with 10 and so on. So again, if I select alt enter, it allows me to replace, here it says method call, let's say message send, with the lambda body, and voila. I mean, it's a very simple refactoring, but a very useful one. Sometimes we don't realize these kind of things, and it's very simple to do it. Another one, this is very interesting. I don't know of any Smalltalk that has an introduce parameter refactoring. All of them, Quiz, Faro, Visual Age have the add parameter, but the add parameter is not the same as the introduce parameter. The introduce parameter allows you to create a parameter from something that you select in the code. So here I can say parameter, introduce parameter, and it will introduce that parameter, yes, and it will replace the message send with the code I selected in the method. That's very, very useful. Again, in all Smalltalks, we have the add parameter, as I'm going to do here. But the add parameter, when you say, okay, I want to add the parameter P1, it asks me for the value of that parameter in all the senders, but it doesn't allow me to select some code from the method and to put that as a value in the senders. Okay, that's the difference. Okay, that's a very interesting refactoring, but the interesting thing about this other refactoring is the introduce functional parameter. What means functional parameter? Well, it means that you can replace that code that you selected with a closure. Okay, so if I select this and I do a introduce functional parameter, of course, in Java, I have to select the type of that parameter. What it will do, as we can see here, let me change this to make it more Smalltalk friendly. Okay, it will replace that part of the code with a parameter that is like a closure. Okay, so that's very useful because sometimes you want to not to replace with the actual values. You don't want to introduce the actual values of the parameters. You want to introduce it as a closure to be able to use it with different closures and in other senders. The same thing. We saw that we have the introduce variable. Introduce variable. We saw it a little bit ago. But also we can do and introduce functional variable. That again is the same as the introduce functional parameter, but as a variable. It allows you to put that code inside a closure. Okay, that's very useful too. And another interesting thing that Intellij has that I just used to show you these refactorings is the possibility to press, like a spotter, Command Shift A, and here you can write something and it will show you all the actions you can do on that part of the code where the cursor is. So for example, if I say, again, let's do an undo. If I press Command Shift A and I write a variable, it shows you all the things that you can do with that part as a variable. Introduce variable, introduce functional variable, inline method, or whatever. Well, I don't know why it's showing me inline method, but it's very, so why I'm showing this? Because, using menus, click and point, sometimes you have to move your hand from the keyboard, go to the mouse or the trackpad and go to the menu. And sometimes, amazingly, it's faster to write what you want to do and select that. For example, extract, and extract method. And I think that's very, very useful. I got really used to this way of using refactorings. I don't usually use anymore the refactoring menu. I use or the shortcut, if I don't remember the shortcut, I directly write here what I want to do, inline, and I select inline method, and so on. It's very, very useful. Okay, so that's all I wanted to show. With these little things, I think we can borrow from Intellij. As I said, they are all related to the language, to the programming language. They are not related to how we connect the IDE with Git or with a database or with a, I don't know, web service or microservice or whatever. And of course, there are many, many more, but I think I have talked too long already. So that was a part of more examples. Conclusion, I think sometimes we as Smalltalker, and I think it's not only we as Smalltalker, it happens with all different language communities, that they get stuck with only the tools they use, the language, the IDEs. The problem with that is that, of course, that you can get more ideas from that bubble, but it's also really interesting to get out of that bubble, of that box, and think on other options, and seeing other tools, other IDEs, other languages is a good way to borrow ideas from them and try to use them in the language that you love the most, that we know is Smalltalk. So anyway, that was the idea of the talk. Thank you. And now questions, if there are.
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you any good ideas for us to steal from the debugger, for instance?
Well, from the debugger. No, I think the debugger Smalltalk debugger is still the best one because it allows you to see, the local context, this context, the instance variables, to change them very easily from the inspector. That's very, very easy in Smalltalk. It's very, very hard. It's not that simple in IntelliJ or Eclipse or all the other IDEs. The only thing that we are missing, at least in Faro and in Quiz, is the ability to run up to a place. For example, let's do this. I would like to, select or put the mouse here and say run to here. But there is no option in Quiz or Faro or Squeak to do that. But there is an option in Visualize to do that. Let's.
Well, and the stop
Yeah.
point, you can put it in another method, not in the same method.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sharing this. I was writing. Sorry. Say it again.
So you want to run the code until you reach some point. My
Exactly.
question is, that point can be in another method, or is
Uh,
inside the same method?
well, in the case of Visualize, it has to be this. If it is in another method, you just set a breakpoint.
Yeah.
Okay, but the nice thing in Visualize is that you can do it in the same method. Let me give you an example. 1, 2, 3. Select. Okay, let's do. No. Print a string. Well, it's not going to be a nice example. And 1 plus 2, I don't, plus 3 times 10. I don't know. I haven't used Visualize, I think, in 10 years. But, it has this run to cursor. So if you put the cursor here, it allows you to go there. Well, not exactly what I meant. Now, okay, if I put the cursor here, run to cursor, well, it worked when I tried today. Okay, let's do this. Run to here. Come on, run to here. Well, I'm doing something. Maybe, what's going on? I don't know why. Maybe it's optimized. I promised that today I tried and, well, I don't know why it's not working. I'm doing something wrong for sure. But the run to cursor allows you to go directly to where the cursor is. But, well, I don't know why it's not working now. I selected the wrong example. And why I like that, because it's very common when you are working, when you are writing tests, when you have a test, and you want to debug a test, you don't usually want to debug the setup. You want to debug the exercise. But if you have a long setup, let's say, I don't know, let's go here. Let me see. You have this setup, yes? In Quiz, it's very simple to start debugging a test. You just press Command R, but I want to debug jump, and I have to do over. And what usually happens, you press one over more. I say, okay, let's restart over. Yeah. So I would love to just go to here, click, and, stop there. And I also would like to, from the browser, say, I want to go here. To stop the debugger here, because this is a test. So you know how to run tests. And, in that way, I skip all the setup and go directly to the exercise. But going to your question, no, there is nothing I would take from the IntelliJ or Eclipse debugger and to put in Smalltalk. No, I think the Smalltalk debugger is even the best, still the best.
In the a comment in the tests,
Yeah.
sometimes it's useful to have an easy way to rerun the setup method.
Yes. Yes. Well, in quiz, if you have, for example, a setup message that does something, I don't know, +1 3. Of course, in this case, it's not doing anything. But if you debug this and you restart the test, it will rerun the setup message, and then will start running the test. Because it's like going here, not here, sorry. Let's do something. Let me put a halt and let me run it. It's going to be easier this way. It's like going back to here. No, not here, sorry. Run case here. It's like going back to here, sorry. Doing a restart and over and into. So it's a little bit more complicated, the perform setup, the perform test in this implementation, because I have a tool called TDD Guru that allows you to see how you are doing TDD. But anyway, the restart, when you restart context that is a method, it reruns the setup to be sure that you start from scratch again, and you don't have to go and do this by hand. Any other question or comment?
Well, yeah. So I made some notes. Right. I like it. I like it a lot. Your talk, and I am under the impression that I like it more the thing that you presented at the end than the one that you presented at the beginning.
Well, okay.
I found those more interesting. But so I would like to highlight some things, right? I found interesting what you say about your students saying that they feel like from the 80s, right? Most likely they haven't been born in the 80s nor in the 90s, actually.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think it is quite fair to hear that, right? And I cannot talk about them because yeah, I don't know them, right? But with the people I interact, right, they use dynamic languages, but their IDE are like a text editor, right? They are not using proper IDEs. They do use Sublime or at most VS Code, right? VS Code, which is super powerful. And you haven't talked about the text editor, and I think this is something that we might look at, right? I use VS Code for everything except for Smalltalk, right? Even for LaTeX, I use VS Code, and I really like. I feel that I am very productive on it, right? You can write. I don't know. I put some examples, but you can have code snippets or use the keyword as you present in Intellij that you can find the things that you can do, right? This is something you can do in this code.
Yes.
There is something that is quite related to this, which is, at least in some Smalltalks, you may have different views of the same code, right? But when you modify one, all the different views do not update, right?
Well, it depends. Depends. They should, at least in quiz, it does. If you change the method, yeah, it also changes the method in the other browser.
Okay,
yes,
that's good.
The problem is,
yeah.
of course, if the other browser, if you are changing the same method in the other browser, it will not update the other browser because you have another version of the method. Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
but I think yes. So I think in B it doesn't work like that. So,
okay.
uh, uh, but I think this is something that is natural. I think for us, small talker, right?
Hmm.
But uh,
So
younger
so let me
people might expect something different.
okay. So let me
The-
say a few things about
yeah.
what you said. First of all, I didn't show examples with an editor because I'm not good with editors. I I
Okay.
don't use editors, so it's something I try to avoid. Okay, because when I work with Smalltalk, there is no way I'm going to use an editor. And when I work with Java or languages like that, I prefer to use an IDE because of the refactoring tools. I think the refactorings are very, very important. And even more important when you have to work with legacy code. So that's something I really I know. There are very powerful editors like V or VS Code and those things, but missing refactorings for me is like missing an arm. It's not the same. So that's why I didn't show examples with an editor. I'm not good using editors, and I'm not used to that. But for sure, we can get ideas from them. That's for sure. Um, Related to when you said that most of the dynamic languages programmers that use editors, and I think that makes more sense that with statically typed languages because IDEs for dynamically typed languages are not really good regarding refactorings because, as we all know, if you don't have type information, some refactorings are very difficult to do or to implement. For example, a rename. We all know that in Smalltalk, when you do a rename, you have to select all the senders and implementers that you really want to rename because you may not want to rename others. Um,
Yeah, but let me
so
interrupt
yeah,
just one
let me
second.
yeah, dale. Okay, okay.
But no, but the problem is that I think they are getting closer. Like to work with VS Code is very similar to what you were showing actually.
Well, I haven't worked with VS Code with a dynamically typed language, so I don't know. I don't know that. I can tell you my experience using RubyMine is
Hmm.
for Ruby, from JetBrains, and WebStorm to work with JavaScript, also from JetBrains, and the refactorings they offer you are very limited. The same with PyCharm, also from JetBrains for Python. But when you start using type annotations, at least PyCharm and WebStorm start showing you more refactorings because they get more type information and they can, you know, do more reliable refactorings. So that's very important for me. That's something that uh, we have to start, um, thinking more and more in Smalltalk, and Gilad did it in the 90s with type annotations from Strongtalk, uh, and I'm doing it with live typing. The difference is how do you get the types, or how do you annotate the types? Uh, Mostly all the dynamically typed languages now are doing type annotations. You have them in Python, you have
Python.
them in JavaScript with TypeScript, you have them in Ruby with, I don't remember how they call it. And what we did in Quiz that we called live typing is a different approach where the types are collected by the VM and they are showed to you, and you don't have to maintain them as a programmer. You don't see it in the code. You just go and put the mouse in a place, and it shows you, I don't know, the type of this. Well, yeah, let me run the test because it doesn't have right now.
Yeah, but
You know how it
aware of
works.
it.
So
Yeah.
why I'm saying this, because once you have type information, you can start improving amazingly all the refactorings and all the what happened with this. Okay, the refactorings and the the syntax highlighting and the autocomplete and all those things. It's completely different how yeah, I don't know what's going on. Okay, I don't know. It's completely different. Let me just show you the example. What you can get when you have type information, how you can improve the tools. So let's go to whole test. So well, for example, this is an improvement I made in the rename. If I want to rename a message and that message doesn't have another implementers and doesn't have senders, it won't ask you, the scope of the rename. It will just rename it for you. But let's say I want to rename this message, default room. Yes? Well, I don't know what is going on with this. Oh, I know, my mistake. I know why it's not working. Let me do it again. I wrote some tests that wait a minute. The problem is this one. It's doing loop. Okay, that's the problem. So okay, now it works. So okay, let's say I want to rename default room. Default room has two implementers in two different classes. But if I want to rename only the one in this class, of course I could say, just rename it in this class. Yes, because you can narrow the scope of the refactoring. But with live typing, we added these two other options. And the more interesting one is actual scope. The actual scope is the one that only looks for implementers of that message of the type of the receiver and the senders of that message where the receiver is of the same type. In this case, of course, it's always self. It's a very simple, very stupid example, but it gets more interesting when you have let's see here, implementer of this message. Well, I don't have the other, but when you have let's do something. Let me implement add put here. Yeah, that does nothing. And let me just say here self add one put two. Okay. So now again, if we look for implementers of add put, you have 38. I'm not going to look for senders. Well, there are many, 700. But if I look for actual implementers, I will just get one. And if I look for actual senders, it will get just one. Well, it will take a little bit. Here it is. Just one sender. This other one too. And these all possible senders that are not real actual senders. So if I rename output with output one using actual scope, it will narrow, the scope to. It takes a little bit for because of the senders. It's looking for the senders. Output is a optimized message send, so it has to look at the bytecode. So that's why it takes a little bit. But anyway, having type information allows you to improve the refactorings a lot. And I'm very used now. Well, I'm going to stop it. It doesn't make any sense to continue. I should have used another message anyway. I'm not selecting the right examples today. But when you start, getting used to these refactorings with type information is very, very, very helpful. It allows you to work really, really fast. And the same thing with the auto completion and with the syntax highlighting. So what I'm trying to say is that type information is very important. And I said, Gilad showed us the way in the 90s. I still don't know why we are not putting more effort to have that in Smalltalk. I think and if we don't do it, I think we're going to miss the train, because most of the dynamical languages are doing it in a way that I don't like. But, I prefer how we do it with live typing, that it doesn't pollute your code with type information and you don't have to maintain it, and the VM does it for you. But anyway, other dynamic languages are doing it, and I think it's very important for Smalltalk to do something related to that. Sorry, Javier, I don't know if I answer your question and I talked too much, but
it was. This is very common, but it was more of a comment than a question.
okay.
But yeah, what I say with the editor is like when we go to the actual action of editing code, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there are things that can be improved. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
We can, yeah. I was just saying this, like there are also very
Yeah,
interesting
yeah,
things.
I
Like
agree.
one little thing that you show, and I don't know if you noticed, but I use it a lot, is that in Intellij, probably, you can select many repetitions of the same piece of text, right?
Yes.
And edit that, right? And you edit
Mhm.
simultaneously. And I do that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. That's very useful when you work with a text, of code. In a
Yeah.
Smalltalk, we don't work with text. Well, we do, but only small chunks of methods. But yeah, I agree with you that those things are
But
very useful.
but
And
for renaming a variable, right? This is a super cheap way to rename. I do tuk, 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 and that's it. Right.
well, it depends, because let's say if you want to rename an instance variable, an
Yeah,
instance
yeah, that's
variable
a
can be
different.
referenced in subclasses that they may
Yeah.
not be in the. Okay, so this is not that easy, it's not that simple, but for some things I completely agree with you that using a text editor, it's very cool and it works really fast. And let me tell you another idea I have.
But I
um,
didn't say that.
what you didn't
I
say
did
that?
not say that. No, I did not
Okay,
say that. What I
okay,
say is that we should pay attention to what people do in text editors.
okay, yeah, I agree. um, I was going to tell you that, well, not only you, everybody. Something that we talked with Leandro and the other guys. Well, I think you also participated on this, because sometimes, again, no, when I'm starting a new semester, I have to teach Smalltalk to programmers, new Smalltalkers. They are used to work with text-oriented programming languages. Sometimes I think, what would happen if we could use Smalltalk as with text editors, very simple, just for them to learn the syntax, to understand a little bit how the language works, and then after a couple of weeks switch to a real Smalltalk environment. What would happen? Well, I don't know. That's something I want to try someday. Of course, that when you get used to Smalltalk, that seems completely absurd. Why would you do that? You don't have reflection in a text editor. You cannot, evaluate code. You cannot inspect objects, and you cannot debug as you can in the real Smalltalk environment. But at the beginning, for some students, that's not what they want to do. There is a very interesting study about, sometimes when you put limits to people, people get more creative because they feel more safe. When you remove some limits, they get more afraid, so they don't try as many things as they would do it when they have some limits. So what I'm trying to say here, you know, maybe for new small talkers, for students, maybe, and this is a big maybe, maybe if they start using Smalltalk as a common text programming language to understand the language and so on, maybe that will, the ramp up will be faster, and then switching to a Smalltalk environment will be easier. But I don't know. I'm not sure. That's just an idea. I may try it someday.
Yeah, thank you.
Hernan, if I might comment a bit, I could keep you up all night with
Of
comments.
course.
But I think the point about text editors is very valid, though I have ignored that advice many times myself. And I generally don't see a contradiction, right? Thinking about this, one problem with Smalltalk, which I've pointed out many times, is you don't actually have source code. You don't
Mhm,
have a
mhm,
syntax for programs for larger bodies, which is a limitation. But if you did, then there's no reason why you can't present all this in a text editor in the environment. Like rather, the structured view isn't necessarily the only view
mhm,
that you
mhm,
have. So you could have a view where you say, let's suppose you have a syntax for classes. I mean, this really just occurred to me. Well, it's been told in some form or another many times, but you could show the entire syntax for a class like just as if it were in a file, but it's actually in your environment where you do have reflection. You can do
mhm.
intelligent things with all these things, and it's just one view. You could flip it like a switch and,
Yeah.
switch these things. There are options there.
Yes,
I
yes, yes. I completely agree. Yeah. The only reason I mentioned editor instead of the Smalltalk environment is because usually people, the programmers are used to certain editors and the shortcuts of those editors, and how they work, and that they may not be the same as the one when you have an
Right.
editor in the
And
Smalltalk
if you
environment.
have a syntax, people can write their modes or whatever garbage they're used to if they really insist. Um, it's just that these things are not either or.
Mm,
And that there is a lot of just for some operations, yes, these fancy refactorings, I mean, they're based on structural information, but I feel that this IntelliJ stuff is getting out of hand. It is there is a reason why an army of people works on this, and they produce this thing that is bloated and buggy, and
mhm,
that is because they get feature happy. This
mm,
happens to every system. I am working on an Apple computer, and Apple is at the end of its life at this point. These machines are rapidly becoming unusable
mm.
for the same reason, because there's a team that keeps shoving stuff in. So chasing all these features, I feel, is actually not the right thing. You want
Okay.
to be more strategic about it, because the effort of maintaining all these menus and options and a million things, it's likely you don't have that army, and even if you did, it leads to bugs and bloat and problems. So I'm not keen on that. There occasionally are things. Yes, the run to cursor is a very nice thing, actually,
Mm,
because it lets you get in the middle of expressions. It doesn't require you to go clicking for multi things, start breakpoint, put it here, put it in a gutter. Everything that goes in the gutters in all these Java IDs, where they all belong, is basically in the gutter.
mhm,
And it's so there are it's good to keep looking, and some of these things are really good ideas. But a lot of this fancy thing, for example, this whole thing about, okay, I'll tell you the types and you can choose which ones to look at and whatever. I think it's much better to have an environment where basically you're live all the time and you actually have the data,
yeah.
right? And the types, rather than trying to keep up with all this static stuff. So
Mhm.
it's these are just random comments and kind of in a hurry because I know you guys, it's probably getting late. But other than that,
No,
yeah, I think the sentiment of looking at other stuff is very important, as you know, that you should.
yeah,
Alright.
I mean, I understand your point, Gilad, and I agree with what you said. Of course, that the idea is not to get everything from Intellij and put in Smalltalk. No, it's not the idea. You have to do it in a strategic way, as you said. I just wanted to show some of the refactorings and nice stuff that I think could be nice. Not all of them, of course. Maybe not all of them are necessary, and of course, for sure, there are others that we could create based on what Smalltalk really is. Yeah, so yeah, I agree with you. And I was going to say something else. I'm getting old, so maybe in 3 minutes I will remember what I wanted to say. But thank you, Gilad. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, if I may comment, do you hear me, actually?
Yes, John. Yes.
Excellent. So if I may comment, then I would disagree with a claim or statement that there is not much that we can take from the debuggers for the other systems.
Okay.
Actually, I think there is a lot of to be desired. One thing that, and I'm not going to pretend that I checked that recently on all Smalltalk implementations I can possibly get my hand on. But it has been my experience that there is one, for people coming from other systems, quite basic feature like putting a breakpoint somewhere, right? So, in a worst case, we have to put a self-halt, which is really completely ridiculous in the 21st century. But even in the better cases, you click in the debugger and you get the breakpoint, right? But what it does is just that it inserts the self-halt. Now, the problem is you cannot do that on the method that is already executing. So, what I'm doing quite often when I'm doing Java, well, I'm not doing Java that much, mostly C++ these days. But what I'm doing is quite often is that, I just read through the code and put the breakpoint somewhere below, or maybe in a, somewhere higher or deeper on the stack, and just hit continue to get to that point, which in most Smalltalk I've seen, well, all of them, is pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing.
Yeah, I agree, John. I agree with what you said. Of course, putting a breakpoint is something that the Smalltalk debugger is missing. Yeah, I agree. I forgot about that, but I completely agree. Visual-H has that option, and it works pretty well. But
yeah, but can you put it on the method and a new breakpoint in the method which is already executing?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
That seems to be exactly the run to cursor.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah. But we can try it later. Yeah.
We can try later, but I don't think this is a run to the cursor.
Yeah, it's like putting a breakpoint where the cursor is.
Run
the method.
Run to cursor could be slower, maybe. It depends on how you implement it. If you don't put a breakpoint, then it will go slowly until it gets the destination. That could be a difference.
That's an implementation detail. Basically, what you should have is a feature say, stop here, and if it's somewhere where I can change the code and change the code to insert a proper breakpoint, I should do that. If I'm in the live frame, then I should just walk there, and yes, I can optimize where it, what goes in the simulator and what doesn't, but that should actually not be really visible to people.
Well, it should not be visible, but if it's 100 times slower, then, it's kind of useless.
Well, in a debugger.
Anyway, that's one thing. The other thing is there is quite a lot of cases or problems that are very difficult to debug using a Smalltalk debugger, if not impossible. I mean, have you ever tried to debug a user interface event loop of a Smalltalk? You know, things like this.
Yeah, but that's not only with Smalltalk. I think if you want to debug any event loop, you will have problems because of the asynchronous.
No, not really. No, not really, because in most of the systems, the debugger lives out of the system.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right. So you can, you know, it's like debugging a scheduler, a Smalltalk scheduler is, you know, next to impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, Smalltalk is, you know, there is this idiom of Smalltalk that should have never been implemented, which is value uninterruptibly, or, you know, disable interrupts.
Mm-hmm.
That's great, but try to debug the code inside it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I understand what you're saying.
There's a lot of things.
Yeah, but that's, I think that's not a problem of the debugger, but the problem is that the debugger is running in the same environment, in the same, that's related to the Smalltalk architecture. So if you could do a remote debugging, I think you wouldn't have the problem. In Visual-Edge, again, Visual-Edge has a remote debugger. I'm not sure if you can debug an event loop, but at least the debugger is not running the same environment as the Smalltalk code. So it may work. But
well,
yeah,
that's my question for Mariano. But you know, the way I believe it is implemented is that, you know, it just sends the messages over the wire, but the debugging, you know, the suspending and stepping through is inside the remote image.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It's just the user interface is somewhere else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will pretty much all I wanted to say is that, you know, there is quite a lot of things that can be improved there and learned.
With remote debugging is that you don't really need that event loop to run, to be active in order to use the debugger. Okay, so you can stop it and the debugger still works. So even if it's message passed, you don't need it for the UI to run. That's a difference.
Yeah, but I mean, there is also, you know, the event loop that processes the events from the operating system, like, you know, when you read the stuff from socket, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, how do you debug that?
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, thank you, Jan. I completely agree with what you said. I didn't think about those situations because they're not usually what I do, but it happened to me before. Things. Yeah, of course. I know you are most, you know, in the low level stuff, and for sure you're suffering those kind of things. But yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, thank you for mentioning.
And also another comment more on the stuff you said earlier. You know, the thing I found quite interesting is that you mostly talk about you know, writing the code, but that's not what you do most of the time, right? Most of the time you read the code, and even on the reading the code, there is a lot to be desired. You know, just the Smalltalk idea that if you want to look at the implementers, you just have to select it and do implementers, and then you get another window, and you have to get rid of that window.
I was going to.
This is much simpler thing than, you know, doing these fancy refactorings. That this is much lower hanging fruit than, in my view.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that a little bit. Just one thing that a couple of weeks ago I read on Twitter. Some Lisp guy, I don't remember his name, answered to a Smalltalk guy, I don't remember that name either, that, you know, the Lisp guy mentioned that, overlapping windows in a development environment is not a good idea, that with Lisp they did it with just one window, and that's why Intellij now has one window where you look one class at the time. And and that's true in Intellij. For example, something I realized when I started working with it is that you only have one class at the time in the editor. It's not like, for example, Eclipse, where you can have different tabs, one per class. And what they have is a very easy way to go back and forward, like in a browser. So I was wondering, for example, not when you look implementers, but when you browse a class from a source code, instead of opening a new browser, what would happen if you just go to that class using the same browser, and then allow you to go back, like in a web browser with a button, and go forward and always use the same browser. Faro has that, but I haven't used it that much, so I cannot say if it is a good idea. But
well, I can say, because I did that exactly, in Smalltalk X browser years ago. So long ago, so that I don't even remember when. And that was the single feature that improved the experience dramatically.
Cool.
Like
cool.
like in Eclipse, that you press a control and it highlights the selector. Then you press click and you get to the implementer. Obviously, if you don't have the type information, you have a list of methods with classes. But at least, if you know a little bit, you have this browser-like back and forth buttons.
Yeah.
Which is also a very familiar concept, so it's easy to use. My experience on a sample of one person, that's me, shows that this is really important.
Well, I have a sample on the opposite direction of one person. So
I might. We have been using that model in Newspeak since Newspeak started.
Yes.
And it works rather well, but it does have limitations. There are situations where they're much less frequent, but there are situations where you want multiple windows. I'm actually thinking of basically getting it to become a bit like a tiling window system, so that you can split things, so you can see unrelated things next to each other, because that does happen. So just having, the stuff literally runs in the web browser. We can use the browser's back and forth buttons.
Yes.
And so yeah, that has a lot of advantages. In the end, you need a bit of both. You do need a bit of support for more than that.
Yeah. So when I use, again, sorry, VS Code, I have a 32 inches display, and I split into 8 different windows because I like to see many things at the same time, right? And this is because I learned Smalltalk before learning everything else. I got used to that, and I enjoyed that a lot. Luciano, if I am not wrong about this, he wrote a tile thing for quiz, right?
For quiz, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's the way to go. But I personally need to have many views of the thing I'm working on, right? Yeah. But that's me.
Okay. That's, I think, the best option is, like Gilad said, to have both solutions. But yeah, as Jan said, for me, it's very important when you want to see implementers to do it very easily. This quick version, when you want to see implementers of a message, you have to select the whole selector, and then you just can do Control M or whatever. In Quiz, we changed that, and you don't have to select the whole selector to see implementers. You just click, put the cursor in a message, Command M, and automatically looks for the selector that the cursor is on. So it's much faster. It's much faster. The same thing with inspect. When you do an inspect, you don't have to select the whole thing. You just do an inspect, and it selects, where the cursor is. So when I said at the beginning that we need tools oriented to the more oriented to the context, I meant that. I think the Smalltalk 80, the original Smalltalk 80, didn't have as many context-oriented actions, commands, or however we want to call it. And I think we're still, lagging behind adding most of those things in the current Smalltalks. For example, visualize, the rename doesn't have a shortcut. I think that's absurd. I don't know, but anyway. Okay. So now we can talk about football. What else do we want to talk? COVID, politics. Okay. I think we have reached the end. Pocho?
Yeah, well, I think this has been a very nice meeting. As always, this reminds me of the Smalltalk spirit. It's like you start talking about something and you easily diverge and go back and forward. You end talking about different interesting topics. So I enjoyed this kind of meetings very, very much.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot today.
Well, I want to say I want to thank all of you for being here. I wasn't expecting that much of the audience. Again, Gilad, thank you very much. John, Leandro and Juan, all of you and everybody also. But yeah, thank you for being here and see these crazy ideas.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can do a final applause for the speaker, if you can unmute. Very deserved one.
Thank you to myself.
And okay, so I hope to see you in the next meeting. I think it's going to be Juan. I think it's going to be next week. I'm not 100% sure, but it's the most probable thing.
On the 25th?
On the 25th?
No, it shall be on Wednesday. The only problem is that, well, people is going to leave on Wednesday because Thursday is a holiday.
Yeah.
So we have to check that. But yes, the idea is
Gilad is in a lockdown. We are almost the same thing here. So the 24th at night is fine.
Yeah, 11.
Yeah, I think so. We can do it while we wait for Santa.
Okay. Okay. So I'm glad to see you again, and I hope to see you again next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Carl.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
It was great. Bye-bye.